Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Dave Uffer. I'm the Vice President of MedTech at Alera Health. My background for 30 years in MedTech has been with large cap MedTech companies, started with Abbott Laboratories. I spent time with Boston Scientific in business development and strategy. I've been with Integra Life Sciences, and Hologic was the smallest organization, a $5 billion market cap company. I was with Covidien, and then in my last role at Medtronic. And 3 years ago, I went from 90,000 employees in one day to join Alera Health with 90 employees. So today we're going to have a panel of 5 distinguished executives that have all been with large companies, running very large organizations, and now they're CEOs running either early stage or early commercial organizations. We're going to share some of their experiences, some of their skills that they felt were appropriately translated, and some of the things that you need to learn anew as you're running an organization as a CEO. I'm going to let them each introduce themselves. We have all the way on my right, Jim Corbett, the CEO of CathWorks, Todd Usen, the CEO of Active Surgical, Tim Moran, CEO of Modus GI, Paul Malloy of ClearFlow, and Brian Verrier, CEO of Osseo. Jim, you want to start by giving us an introduction of your background before you took over CathWorks, and then we'll just come right down the line so everybody has a little bit of relevance to your history and how that translates into what you're doing today.
Sure. I spent my early career working for the organization you now know as Edwards Life Sciences. At the time, it was American Hospital Supply and Baxter Healthcare. And I was there for a good portion of my career. And following that, I worked with SciMed Life Systems, which became the interventional cardiology of Boston Scientific. And of course, that's my second large company. And following that, did my first early stage company, which is diabetes, and a company called Home Diagnostics. There's been a couple since then, in fact, Vertos Medical and now CathWorks. So and of course EV3, how was that for from the founding time until well after we did the IPO. So I've had a big range of experiences in the big to small category.
All right, hello, I'm Todd Usen. I've been in MedTech for 30 years. The big picture is where I spent 13 and a half years at Boston Scientific, GI division, doing everything from sales to global marketing to sales management leadership. In my last role, I was the head of the US in the neurovascular space out here in California. And then I left Boston and had the opportunity to go to Smith & Nephew back on the East Coast. And I ran the sports medicine division, and then ran the total joint and trauma division, and then it was nice enough to, I guess no one else wanted it, I became the president of orthopedics for the entire group. It was a great way to cut your teeth and learn that business. And then most recently, from there, I had the opportunity to become the president of all the medical divisions at Olympus. And so took that opportunity as the first non-Olympus person to take on a president's role, and it was a great experience to help globalize Olympus, and took it from 6 medical companies to 11, which it is today. And then got smart, I guess, and said it's time to go chase some cool technology, and that's where we are today.
Great. My name's Tim Moran. I'm the CEO of Modus GI, and similar to Todd, I've been in MedTech for about 25 years. Much of which was spent at Covidien. About 18 of those years was at Covidien, really starting actually in some of the earlier companies, Kendall, Tyco Healthcare, then the spin out of Covidien, and then a little over a year under the Medtronic umbrella after the acquisition. I then moved, worked for a company that was owned by 2 private equity firms, but still was a $2 billion company, privately held, called Convatec, which is advanced wound therapy. And we went in, and it was a new leadership team, and had the opportunity to take that public on the London Stock Exchange. After the lockup ended, realized that I wanted to maybe take some of the things I've learned working in these big organizations and try to apply those in a smaller organization where I could help shape the strategy, but also the culture of the team. And ended up here now for the last year and a half at Modus GI, and it's been really an incredible, fulfilling year and a half. A lot of hard work, but really, really interesting to kind of see the comparison and contrast to the bigger company.
Thanks, Tim. I'm Paul Malloy, the CEO at Clearflow, based here in Irvine, California. I'm the economic migrant with a funny accent on the panel. I got to the US in '93 with a company called Datascope, and Datascope was a New Jersey-based company, and my job was managing Southeast Asia. I actually managed Japan, and I met Jim Corbett when he was the general manager of Baxter Japan, and Baxter was the distributor for Datascope back in those days. And I ended up working for Baxter. They moved me to California in '97. That's how I got here. And after that, I was at US Surgical. That was my last large corporate job outside of the ones where a company was acquired and I was imported into the business. But US Surgical was acquired by Tyco Healthcare back in those days. And that was the first time I actually made any money on stock in a company. I got laid off with a severance, but all the stock vested, which was a new experience for me. And I suddenly realized it was more than my paycheck, and maybe there was something to this. So this is 5 startups later on. Clearflow is the 5th one I've been involved in. LMA was the first. That was an anesthesia company that was sold to Teleflex. Vasanova was the last one, and I ended up working at Teleflex after they acquired Vasanova for about 3 years. So I ran the vascular division. It was basically the Arrow Healthcare company that they acquired for about $2 billion in 2007, and had about $500 million of revenue. So I ran that for about 3 years, but did not want to live in King of Prussia. Just got remarried out here in California. So the same investors that exited with Vasanova funded Clearflow, and here I am as the CEO 6 years on. And it's a small world because the company names you're hearing, and that big and small, interconnectivity is very real, and that's very much part of my background.
Thanks, Paul. Brian Verrier, the CEO of Osseo, started with Medtronic, with the old Medtronic Interventional Vascular Group back in the early 90s. Stayed with that group post the acquisition of AVE that happened in 1999, where I moved my way into management and marketing, ultimately landing as the VP of sales from 2004 to 2010, head of US sales for that group. And then I went to Covidien to help build their vascular therapies business. And through a series of acquisitions, after 5.5 years left, I was the president of the peripheral vascular business, and we were acquired to Medtronic, where I spent another 2 years, leaving in mid-2016, and joined Osseo during that spring as a board member, and transitioned in later that year as the CEO.
Well, tremendous backgrounds from everybody. I'd like to take those backgrounds and those experiences from each of you and start by talking to the audience here a little bit about the skills that you learned, acquired, and had to deploy while running large commercial organizations, and how that's translated into now leading young stage, early commercial organizations. Jim, you want to start us off?
Sure. One of the formative things I think that you get from the larger company is that you really get development, which you don't get in the earlier stage companies quite the same at that part of your time in your career. And I think the biggest takeaway is how valuable that domain expertise that you get in a large company really is. And I had an opportunity to get quite a few functional experiences, and what I found is I needed all of it. So in the early stage company, you have so many needs, and having developed that domain expertise in different functional areas really made I think, a big difference for me personally.
Todd, a little bit about your experience and the same question.
Sure. I think I look back often on my career, and I think I was really lucky at the time to kind of cut my teeth at Boston Scientific. And I say that because once you're identified or raise your hand and want to have an opportunity to move up your career, you're basically, if you're someone that they feel can do that, you're always exposed, I always felt, to 1 or 2 levels above you while you're still responsible for your job today. So I always felt that it was, development is critical. And you know, I joke with people, and I think I said it before, I was brainwashed for 14 years at Boston Scientific and loved every minute of it. And because I felt that development was critical. One of the things I realized coming to, and I've always carried that when it's the number one thing in any team, you can have the best technology in the world with good people and you'll be pretty good. You can have a good technology with great people and you win every time. If you have a great technology with great people, you never lose. So it's always people first, technology second. My opinion, obviously, I'm not, you know, it has to be, because one of the things I do realize, you know, coming to a smaller company is it was good learning for me. If someone was a CFO or a vice president at Boston or Smith & Nephew or Olympus, I knew the road they had to get to that level, and the training and the work. And then you kind of come into a team and someone might have the same title, and it's not a knock. The expectations can't be the same because they haven't necessarily gone through the same training. They're great at what they do, but I can't expect someone to just do things that I was used to in the past. So it's on me. It's on the leader. It's never on the individual to make sure that everyone lives up to their expectations. So that's the biggest change I saw. If I met a VP of finance at Smith & Nephew or Boston or Olympus, I never had to ask. If I see somebody that's in those titles now, even myself, I have to make sure that, you know, I shouldn't take it for granted. And we all have skill development that we need to do and continue.
Let's flip it the other way now. Brian, tell us a little bit about some of the skills that you either had to develop newly, augment or supplement in this role, where you had tremendous background, again, in large organizations. Certain things I'm sure you had to learn anew or be able to augment.
Sure. So maybe from the perspective of, you know, what you're able to get from experiences in large company, I think it's the obvious. Obviously, you're very well trained in process and discipline, and leading large organizations, and learning, you know, how to identify good talent and bring them in and make sure you're developing those folks. And so you get a lot of appreciation. I think it's been pretty well said. I think there's also the true reality, as much as maybe this is a bit provocative, but the true reality is as you grow inside of a large organization, you're surrounding yourself with the best people inside that organization, or folks that may come out from outside the organization, to lead in each individual function. And so for me, I grew up in sales and marketing, so I naturally gravitate to sales and marketing. So in leading a large organization, I think when I left, when we were integrated into Medtronic, it was about 5,500 people. I had a senior staff of 20 people. I had 2 executive assistants that I was working with. So you learn how to move that engine. But the reality is you have experts in all functions. So do you ever truly become an expert? I won't speak for all of us, but it'd be fair to say that each person in this room, all of us on the stage, have come from somewhere where there's a comfort zone. And then you look for the best people. In a startup company or early stage company, you have no choice but to become an expert. Even though the people are good, you're embedded every single day at a very deep level. So it's very different. So, on one hand, carrying in the very strong operational discipline and processes from a big company to a small company. By the way, it could be a watch out too. You don't want to over-process a small company, but you do have to put in place some things that are going to enable the organization to be disciplined. And then secondarily, you have to, and maybe more importantly, you have to be willing to roll up your sleeves. You just have to have that mentality. So in a big company, you may be working on a large regulatory project. PMA could take years. You have people in clinical and your regulatory teams that are driving that. And about every month, you're getting updated as to where it is. Today, it's every single day. I'm not only updated, I'm actually writing responses to the US FDA. So there are big differences, but I'm one for sure that wouldn't suggest that I was an expert in every functional area operationally. I had to rely on very good people.
Paul, you've been on both sides of this with Tyco Healthcare in large organizations. You were with LMA, again, a young company, and then acquired into Teleflex. A little bit of your experience on both sides, and where you think some of the challenges for CEOs that are migrating from large companies.
Yeah, I've never really subscribed to the idea that there are big company people or small company people. And if you look at the audience here or this panel, you can see that you can migrate in and out of them. as long as the fundamental skill sets are there. I think a lot of the essential requirements are identical, and it boils down to the, let's call it the appetite for risk of the different kinds of organizations. You know, large corporations, especially if they're public, by definition have a different set of requirements to shareholders, so they have a different investor horizon than the early stage private companies that have been involved in. And that automatically kind of infuses a culture into the organization that demands a different viewpoint. But you still have to have the same operating systems. It's a complete fallacy to think that you can run a startup without the process controls that exist in large organizations. So you absolutely have to have people that have experience in that. And then where Clearflow is right now, 6 years in, we've just hired 2 very competent commercial level VPs out of large public corporations, precisely because at the point that we're commercializing, I'm really not interested in guys that can tell me that they move fast and are gunslingers. I want salespeople and marketing people that understand process and process management and sales disciplines, and that's the transition to the next level of growth. So, if the Venn diagram is in the middle, there are outliers on both sides. I think somebody alluded to not over-processing. You can't have the sort of quality system and regulatory policing in small companies that the large corporations are obliged to have. On the other hand, you can't get away from having those ISO 3045 systems in place. And like I said, when you've borrowed money from venture or private equity and you've got a 5 or 7 year window to get a 5x back, that's a clear horizon. And the amount of risk you take, and there's an inverse return on risk and rewards. You have to just go and take some risks that are different than the large companies need to take. They're by definition a little bit more conservative just by virtue of the environment they're in. So I think in sum, the panel's kind of covered a lot of the bases around the similarities. I've stated that I don't think people are formed for one or the other. There are people that will never end up in both worlds, but a large portion of our industry is very, very much interchangeable if they've got those skill sets.
Insightful. Thanks, Paul. Tim, you've gone from still Modus GI, a publicly traded company, but again, it's much smaller. I think everybody here in the panel is with a company that's under 100 people and have certain objectives they're marching toward. In the corporate world, we have a pretty known cadence to activities: strategic planning, financial planning, product rollout, and so forth. Can you tell us a little bit about the difference in both the cadence of activities and then the pace, and how that's changed being in a smaller startup, early commercial?
Yeah, sure. And I just want to make one quick comment in listening to my colleagues. I think the key takeaway for me is that a lot of the fundamental skills remain, right? Regardless of if you're in the big company or the small one, the things that you look for in people and in culture. And I recall my last role, not here, but it was owned by, as I mentioned, private equity, and it was my first board meeting, and I remember, putting together what I wanted to share, and my boss at the time said, "Hey, I really don't think you should start with this whole thing about the team and the culture you want to build. These guys are more about the money, and they want to know how you're going to deliver." So I remember stepping back and thinking, okay, this is interesting, but I actually feel pretty passionate about the importance of this. And I said, trust me, I'm not going to go on for 30 slides about culture, but I think it'll be in a way that they'll understand that this is where it all starts, the team that you put together. And I would say if any of the folks that are running companies, depending on how you're owned currently today and what the focus is, never lose sight of how important it is to have the right people at the end of the day. But anyway, so back to the public thing. One thing that I tell my team all the time, and I think this resonates, it resonates in big public companies too, but particularly in small public company when, I think every day matters to us, right? There's not a day that can go by that we can be lax and not get something accomplished. Because I always say, you got to remember that there's a clock and there's a scoreboard, right? And if you think about that at all times, those are two priorities that we're constantly fighting against, right? We've got to put points on the board, but there's not an endless clock to get it done in, right? And just that mentality, I think, is something that it has to be in people's mindset. So Brian, you said, there's a little bit of like comfort zone that you have in the big companies, and that by no means are there folks in the large companies that are sitting back not working hard, right? Having been there, but you miss a day or two, and it's not changing the overall trajectory of that organization. When you have 50 employees, right, and you're in your second quarter of commercialization, there can be no Friday afternoons off, right? We've got to deliver. So to me, it's really been about identifying that talent and the people that are willing to make the sacrifices and hopefully gain the rewards of getting there. But not everyone has that mindset that want to take that on, and that's fine too. But I don't think they'd be happy in the environment that most of us live in.
Great. You brought up culture. I'm going to go back to Todd, Todd, you were part of a Japanese company that you said had a little bit of a shift. You were the first non-Olympus president of that company. Talk to me about establishing culture in your company, where I think everybody here learned how to succeed exceptionally well in an already established large company culture, and you operated within that established culture. Tell me about building your own company culture now and how that rolls out.
Well, I think at the end of the day, to start with the Olympus discussion, they went outside, they made the commitment to the intent was to bring someone in, to bring in different medical experience and go outside the walls, because everything was inside. And while the Japanese are absolutely fantastic to work with, they still only knew their culture. So they made that decision to bring people in so you can go establish your own culture and you make your changes. At a small company or a large company, I can honestly tell you I haven't changed a bit in establishing a culture. Cultures, I've never been one that's a big title person. Culture, you don't earn respect because of your title, you earn respect because of your actions. And I still believe, a culture is created working with the people, being the joke is a man of the people or a woman of the people. You have to have that open door and congratulate those that succeed and know that you're right there in the front lines. If even as a president of a division of with 3,000 or 4,000 people on my team, I used to love going in the field, and I would tell the rep, if you need me to be the president today, use that. If you don't, you can tell them you're training me. I don't care. Let's just go have fun. Let's go make it happen. Let's go work, and I want to learn what's going on in the market. I want to understand the market. So I've always believed you have to have a culture of the people, and you definitely have to set objectives and hold people accountable. But I've always believed there's 3 basic competencies, I think, in a good leader. If I was writing a book, doesn't mean everybody has that same. Number 1 is inspire others, and inspire others does not mean jump up on that table and pound your chest and say, follow me. It's when people know you have their back and you support them, so then when you need to hold them accountable or share some tougher messages, they got you. And Todd's proven that he's got this kind of leadership. He's got my back, and now I just let him down or let the team down. I'm going to pick it up, so people follow through. Setting clear direction is still culture and holding people accountable. And then ultimately is developing yourself and others. When you demonstrate to your organization, you share your own personal objectives with the team. I share my performance review with the team and say, hey, these are things I need to work on. I think people, they understand that we're all in this together and we're going to go fight to the end. And that's just my way of building a culture. I want people to see we're on the same team, and high fives and chest bumps are welcome. But that doesn't make you win. You still have to. Accountability is still number 1. You have a job to do by a certain date. It's got to be done. If it's not, we got to talk about it, right? But other than that, you got to enjoy your job. You got to enjoy work every day. And if you don't, then you're in the wrong place. I always remind people. Last thing, sorry to take so long, is most of these things are employment at will. So I used to love when people just bitching and complaining and all this stuff. And I said, well, there's no contract that says you have to be here. Don't get me wrong. I want you to stay. But there's got to be something good going on if you're staying here this long, because these are employment at will jobs. So let's find the positives. Let's go build something.
But there's a big difference there when you look at big and small companies. And if you're a CEO with 30, 40, 50 people, everybody's close to the fire.
Yeah.
And so culture is easily disseminated, and the value system is understood. When I took over as president at Teleflex after Vasanova was acquired, and I was ostensibly in charge of the vascular division. The heart of that business was Aerovascular. It's a Pennsylvania company.
Yeah, Reading.
But I can tell you, when you went to the factory in Mexico, Tecate, which was a Plurivac business, or you went to the Willy Rush plant in Germany, which was a whole other company, they'd never been integrated. And we didn't have a common culture. There were really 5 or 6 cultures, and the issues were local, and they were local company issues. And one of the great challenges was how to establish core values when those people were very far away from that fire that we talked about in the middle. So it's a challenge if you don't have a culture to start with. And for a CEO to come in and try to create that is a challenge if it doesn't already exist.
Right.
It takes time, it takes years, and takes example, as you said. I just wanted to point out that I'm running a company with less than 40 people in it right now, and I hope the leadership team all shares values and a value system. I'd like to think that if I went out with my rep in New Hampshire, she would understand those values and reflect them, but that isn't true in large corporations. It's one of the things that gets away from you as companies grow, and I think it's inevitable, and it's one of the constant challenges for CEOs of large corporations. How do you keep those core values for the entire company? Really hard to do when you've got 40,000 employees.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry to make a conversation about it, but on that point, it's, at the end of the day, I understand you can be a huge company, and I know CEOs of monster major global organizations, a little different. You know, maybe at the president level, you can, at the end of the day, I've never been a believer that when you hire someone, they don't have to impress me as the president. I have to impress them that they want to be here and work. And I just, so many people get stuck with their title and think it's really cool to be this title. You know, that's not the way it works. I mean, it's up to me to make sure that, you know, there's so many different generations. People talk about millennials or this. They're great. I got to adjust to them. They don't have to adjust to me. I mean, if I need the best out of them, right? I win if they do really well. I'm replaceable.
It's pretty funny you talk about title, because I always say, I'm like, I think the only one that's impressed by my title are my parents. But because when I think about what I do, and I say that to my team all the time, and they go, wow, we didn't realize your PowerPoint skills, right? Because you're back to doing all the slides, and we have a board meeting, guess what? Like, that's all coming through me. There's not, one of Brian's two assistants that's polishing them up for us. But the important part, though, is I think communicating it, right? And showing that vulnerability. And I think one of the biggest, this is going a little off topic, but one of the biggest issues I've found in my career, it doesn't matter how smart the leader are, what their academic background is, and insecurity is a killer, right? And typically it's the folks that don't have the security, right, that aren't willing to say that to the team.
Absolutely.
And put that out there. And I think, at the end of the day, that's why people rally behind you.
Yep.
Goes back to all the things Todd was saying earlier, but yeah, getting impressed with the title is quickly goes out the door.
Maybe just one last point. I won't cover anything because I agree with everything. I wouldn't add anything. I think I underappreciated, frankly, coming from a large company into a small company, how important culture will be. And the perspective I'll take on this is, and I think we've all said it, technologies is one thing, talent is the most important thing. And if we're not building a culture, small company, 5 people, 50 people, 100 people, you're going to lose that talent. Because people that you're competing for across all of the jobs that you're going to fill are in high demand. Those are the people you want. Guess what? Everyone else wants them too. So if they're going to come into an environment that does not put as a priority, building an environment and a culture that everybody is going to be bonded by, they will walk out the door. Mm-hmm. It'll be too easy for them.
Yeah.
Well, let's go on this a little bit, because I think a large portion of our audience are running companies that are young stage again, and they're going to look to grow and fill out teams and make the right hires. Jim, a little bit on your experience of tapping from the large companies or getting people that have been with other serial entrepreneurs and serial startup talent.
Well, actually, I alluded to this earlier, but I think you really need, when you recruit people, there's kind of 2 issues, and they dovetail into culture, is that you need to get that well-developed talent. It's very difficult to learn new things and behave differently at the same time. Basically acquire new skills while you're adapting to the rapidly changing dynamic of a emerging growth company. That's really hard. And central to this culture question is actually not having everyone feel good, but having them feel good for the right reason. Mm-hmm. And the right reason is success. So if you get the culture oriented around what the business is trying to accomplish, and you start hitting your milestones, that's what builds culture. It's not about what's in the kitchen or in happy hour or any of those types of things. It's actually succeeding. And that's the most important cultural element. And what's great is when you recruit people from those larger organizations, they actually know that. Because in those large organizations, you don't get ahead without succeeding. And so you're acquiring new skills, and you're learning to succeed. That's the ideal place to recruit because you can manage behavior. You can't deliver skill development in the short term. So.
And Paul, I mean, you built the LMA. I see oftentimes people go back to those that they collaborated with before that made success and led to exits. Your experience of tapping again into corporate versus startup talent pool?
I guess I'd make the example by looking at the differences again. With large corporations, when you talk about success, it's really important to try to figure out how everybody understands that. Because when there's 40 of you, the definition of success can be quite plain and easy to see. I mean, if we're a build-to-exit company, we have a 5-year or 6-year horizon, and we've got to get to $40 million of revenues, that's easily translatable. Once you get out to the divisional manager in Germany or Mexico or Brazil, the alignment with corporate objectives just gets more diffuse and it gets harder to translate. Part of having a core team around you that you can trust is knowing that those people are going to reflect the values that you bring in the company, and I guess it's just trust in the end. You know that your management team, your senior leadership team is reliable and is rock solid, because building employee engagement relies upon that consistency. You've got to have the stereotypical mission, vision, strategy exercises done and translated out, whether it's a large organization or a small one. Really what it boils down to is employee engagement. And employee engagement, and we're all selfish animals, determines the success of the corporation as a whole. As soon as you slip below a certain percentage, and there's plenty of data out there from firms like Gallup or SRG, the whole corporation suffers. The difference between great corporations and mediocre ones is 4 or 5 percentage points of employee engagement. Yeah. And engagement is just recognizing what constitutes success, but what it also means for me as an individual. And if you can't align those things, you end up losing people. And you end up with a bell curve with a large portion off to one side that really doesn't get what the corporation's about. And again, I've always tried to hire people into the smaller companies that I could rely upon to be ambassadors for the value system. And again, if you're hiring on a constant basis, you start out with hiring attributes and skills requirements, as Jim just pointed out. But keeping employee engagement, in my mind, is the absolute critical thing. And the larger organizations have a tougher time with that just by sheer volume and scale.
So Paul, you mentioned measuring stick. As commercial leaders of everyone here on the panel of publicly traded companies, your measuring stick typically is your quarterly earnings report. Now, whether your CEO was driving you for top line number all the way down to earnings contribution from your respective divisions, that typically is your measuring stick. You march to a different beat now. Tell us about the experience of how you measure your goals, whether it's a monthly, a quarterly, yearly. What are you marching toward every day, and what time frame?
You said Paul?
Todd?
Oh, I thought you said Paul. You were looking at me. I didn't know if you were talking to me. Well, I think the most important thing now is your key inflection points. I mean, we all have them, no matter what they are. They can be FDA submission, could be FDA pre-submission, depending on what level you are. It can be completing clinical work, first in man, and the team needs to celebrate those. It could be closing of a series round, a fundraising round, and pre-commercial anyway. And then obviously as you advance towards commercial, you're going to start getting some of those measuring sticks. Part of our joke is, I still want to make sure we understand the budget, and we review a P&L, which is only an L right now, right?
Yeah.
So it shouldn't be too hard. You review your L every month and make sure that you know exactly where you are in your spending, and those are inflection points, making sure we understand what the key dates are, how we're going to perform, so I think if you keep people, but then you celebrate the successes, the small successes, and I think it's healthy for the organization to know, hey, like for example, we'll get back from this meeting and we'll share what went on at the meeting, who we spoke to. Team rallies around little things and knows that they all get a good feel. So I think, but to measuring sticks are those inflection points, and every company has them.
Tim, a little bit of your impression in that you're unique here on just this panel, in that Modus GI is publicly traded, and I think your objective is to lose less each quarter at some point, if that's the mandate from your board and shareholders. the measuring stick for you?
We typically don't try to say it that way, but no, listen, I agree with Todd. I mean, I think key milestones that are communicated are, and whether we're public, early emerging, growth public or non-public, they are very similar, right? So when we get a C approval, that's going to be the same as if we were private, if we've communicated it properly. But your point about revenue, right? I mean, that's obviously a key marker for folks. But I think it starts with me in terms of my responsibility to set clear expectations in the market and make sure that either our analysts or our investors or potential investors understand the story, right? What we're playing for, right? Because at the end of the day, you can't forget what we're playing for, and then a clear path of how we're going to get there and what those key objectives will be. And we're with where we're at a quarter or so into commercialization. We're not going to give guidance now, and if we did, I don't think it would wow people, right? But what they do want to know is, okay, for 2 or 3 quarters, you told us what your vision was for the strategy in the first few quarters, and how are we doing against those things? Where do we have the device placed? Are we starting to see repeat utilization at sites? So all these kind of leading indicators to what success will look like. But at the end of the day, I think it just really comes down to being super clear on what those things are and repeating them every single time you have that opportunity, so people know and they know what to expect. They know how to measure and to kind of model the business in the early days.
Resonates quite well with me. The best company I had raised capital for, one of my clients, regardless of the timeline, she always said, here are the milestones I'm working toward, and for 3 years met every milestone on time. And I think that's what we see as success, at least in my experience in working with so many of your like. Going a little bit of a different direction now. When I was at Covidien, we had Covidien Ventures, and they handled all of our minority equity investments. And then through the Medtronic acquisition, we still kept a professional venture team, but the game changed a little bit in that down at the business unit level, we also had responsibility for deploying capital in minority equity investments. And when we would make an investment or look toward that company, it was always starting with the CEO saying, at some point, we think there's going to be a change needed, or is this person going to take this all the way through to the potential exit? And I'd like each of you to comment a little bit about when you see a need or when you see a pivot required to make a change at that CEO level. Sometimes it's technology development, and then that might not be the right person to lead that through either early commercialization or an entire org build out through to late stage. It could be somebody that's great at raising capital solely, and once they get funded, turn it over to somebody else. Jim, the experience with knowing when and how to change in your leadership?
Well, yes, I do, but I was thinking about it as you're describing it. It's quite first of all, different executives do have places where they are better than in other places. There's a good fit theory that I think is real. And I think it's incumbent upon, if you're talking about making CEO change, if you're in the governance element of the board, you actually do need to see that almost like you're looking forward to what the CEO's requirements are going to be. And I think in general that move is made too late by most boards. And there needs to be a sort of an active challenge at all times. The CEO role for these early stage companies is like being a professional sports general manager or coach. Mm-hmm. All you know is it's not going to last a long time, not your whole life. So therefore, it's really an important element to make sure you're in the right place personally, but also if you're in the governance, make sure the right person is in the role. That's key.
Brian, we spoke about this last week, and you had some really intriguing insights on that you want to share with the audience.
I was just chuckling on the comment. Jim, what are the short things in life? Death, being traded, or being fired. But there's truth to that, and I think, and I agree, it comes down to self-awareness at the end of the day. Whether it's the self-awareness of the board, self-awareness of the current CEO that sits in the chair, to understand, what are the key things that need to be accomplished in periods of time. And in big companies, the prior question, about performance metrics, big companies measure by the quarter, small companies measure by the day. It's not necessarily just revenue and EBIT, and it's, did you pass your V&V? Did you get a successful response from FDA, from a submission? I mean, little things can be celebrated. But as far as the self-awareness goes, I think it's real. I think that, good and successful startup companies, maybe taking a lens from my prior life where I was the buyer of early stage technologies, not the seller, so to speak. And you definitely look at companies that have amazing technology, have really passionate people that are around it, but perhaps don't really understand what it's going to take from a skill standpoint at the leadership level to get it over the next milestone. And those are difficult decisions, obviously, especially introspection. If you're the current CEO and you may have a very strong engineering background and you started the company yourself and you've taken it through the point of your development program and you're emerging to launch in a very large market, you're not doing anyone a service, certainly yourself, sitting in that chair many more days than you already have. And so I think there's real truth in it, but I don't think it's startup. I think it exists too at large companies. Evaluating talent, evaluating yourself, knowing when to move or pivot in a different direction can be difficult, but it's incredibly important.
Well, thank you. Well, I think that's our time. I want to thank each of the panelists for sharing. I know each of you are also in fundraising mode, so if any investors in the audience, please approach them after this panel.
We take credit cards.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks.